Chapter 9. Violet squinted at her screen. A notification has just pinged from the Penguin Games repo. An update on a branch labeled GH-KH from user Garrett_Bauer. She clicked on the alert. Curiosity piqued. Their first official fork. Scrolling through the changes, she took note of the comments Garrett_Bauer had left in this code. Drone-based kangaroo tracking for crop protection, she muttered, eyebrows raised. Australian Department of Agriculture? As she reviewed the code, she felt that Garrett's modifications were technically sound and clever. He'd managed to integrate the image recognition software with the drone API, extending the front end to interpret the live feed. Violet knew Stella would want to see this. It had only been a few weeks since they'd released their code, and someone had branched it in such an unexpected direction. Within minutes, she and Stella were on a video call, poring over the branch like it was some kind of digital treasure map. "Look at this," Violet said, sharing her screen. "He's trying to refine the image intake in the function Kang RMF, but he's hitting a wall with the accuracy. Ugh, we need to give this nerd a lesson in naming and code commenting. No one knows what RMF stands for. I think the model is struggling to distinguish kangaroos from the background noise in the overhead shots. The footage is throwing off the pattern detection." Stella's face got larger on Violet's screen as Stella leaned closer to her camera, her expression thoughtful. "He's on the right track, but he's missing something in the pre-processing. We need to adjust the image intake to normalize the backgrounds better before it hits the classifier. Let's give him a nudge." Violet heard the keys clacking as Stella logged into GitHub. "Look at that! A message from Garrett. He knows he's stuck," Stella said. With a grin, Violet and Stella dove into the code, focused on refining the image processing pipeline to handle the challenging conditions of the Australian terrain. They adjusted the contrast and brightness thresholds, fine-tuning the model to distinguish subtle shifts in kangaroo shadows against rocky ground. Stella nudged the algorithm to filter out anything resembling a dog and reinforce kangaroo identification. Violet even pushed a small update to the front-end drone shim, giving Garrett's model access to extra data from the drones, including altitude, speed, and wind direction. These elements would help the algorithm sharpen its predictions and accuracy. In a few hours, their changes were ready to be merged into the Penguin Games and then pulled into GH-KH. Violet clicked to initiate the merge, watching the lines of code blend together. But as they fused, a chill settled over her. A dark thought crept in, one she couldn't shake. She turned back to the camera, her voice quiet but laced with unease. "Stella, do you realize how close this is to becoming a military surveillance tool? The way Garrett's integrated this with drone technology, it wouldn't take much for someone to adapt it. This could go beyond animal tracking fast, and there are people out there who wouldn't hesitate to use it that way." Violet's face grew hot. She grew up in a country where surveillance was woven into the fabric of daily life, but not in the innocuous neighborhood watch kind of way. No, this was a kind of watching that made you think twice before saying anything, before sharing too much, before letting anyone see too deep. It was a place where the data they gathered on you could decide your future. By the time she was old enough to realize what was happening, Violet had become accustomed to the faint hum of distrust that underscored her every action. Living under constant observation, even the smallest decisions felt like quiet rebellions. Growing up, she had watched neighbors disappear and careers destroyed over an action that didn't align with the prevailing agenda. Data was powerful, and in the wrong hands, it was lethal. Violet knew this in her bones, in the cautious way she moved through the world, always aware of who was watching. It was why she'd chosen to work in tech, to understand the mechanics behind the system, to see the monster up close. Now, here she was, staring at lines of code that could open the same doors she'd spent her life closing. Stella saw a way to protect penguins, a charming, almost innocent mission to humanize these animals and tell their stories to the world. But Violet knew the darker side, knew how fast the lines blurred when tracking entered the picture. One tweak, one misused line of code, and this wouldn't just be about nature preservation anymore. It could become something far more sinister. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as her mind raced through the implications. She imagined someone with less scruples, someone in power, leveraging this technology to monitor individuals, to track their every move under the guise of safety. She pictured a person labeled as a repeat offender because they'd walked through a field too many times, only now it was a city, a town square, someone's home. "Stella, we can't let this out," Violet said softly, the urgency of her past coloring her voice. They sat in silence, the weight of her words settling over them. It was easy to get caught up in the elegance of a solution, to see it as just lines of code, a new problem solved. But this wasn't just code. It was something that could be twisted into a tool for surveillance, for monitoring, for control. Yes, for crops now, but what next? Things neither of them wanted to be responsible for unleashing. A few more tweaks, a few people creating a few more branches, and suddenly it would not be about animals anymore. It could go from the original intent to save the emperor penguin families to tracking people, and that was a line they'd never meant to cross. "Violet, software can already track people. We aren't creating anything that doesn't already exist," Stella said quietly. "I'll add the license restrictions. Make it clear that this is not to be used for military applications." Violet watched the shared screen as Stella updated the license document on the Penguin Games repo, each line appearing in the shared project log like a quiet but forceful stand. Violet's stomach twisted with a familiar sense of foreboding as she read through Stella's new restrictions. No military use, no human surveillance applications, and certainly no weapon integration. Human tracking was an absolute no-go. The lines were bold and clear. They were intended to cut off any potential for misuse. But Violet knew all too well how licenses were ignored. The simplest intentions could be warped once software was released into the wild. She hovered her mouse over Stella's notification, watching as it was dispatched to their follower list. "Attention all viewers of the Penguin Games repository. Recent updates include new restrictions on the use of this software. Please review the updated license to ensure compliance. This software is intended strictly for environmental monitoring and conservation efforts, not for military or security applications." Violet leaned back, her gaze drifting to the corner of her screen where Stella's notification had vanished into the ether. It was strange how a few words on a license could feel so hollow when she thought about the stakes. The real risks happened beyond the neat confines of code and licenses. Knowing the intricacies of the code, Violet felt the thin layer of control slipping from their hands. She felt a twinge of doubt, something Stella probably hadn't let herself linger on, or, if she had kept it well hidden. For a moment, Violet's eyes lingered on the grayness outside her window. She wanted to believe this licensing update was enough, that words and boundaries could keep the project safe. But in the back of her mind, a voice whispered that it might only be a matter of time before someone ignored the rules. A matter of when, not if.